What do you think is the one website on the internet where you can't have fun whatsoever? Can you go 24 hours without absolutely throwing a giant fit about something? Yes, that site is in fact Twitter. You already guessed it.
They're like little piranhas or catfish just constantly eating shit for no reason. They just go out of their way to make themselves as miserable as possible and find things to be upset about.
No conversation that needs to be had. Rape is fucking serious. Rape has happened to me 4 fucking times, and I'm sick and tired of this fucking debate. Men need to respect women, period!
I have nothing to apologize for because I did not sexually assault Jack Wright.
I know that everyone here will soon be marching over to the Capitol building to peacefully and patriotically make your voices heard.
Donald Trump has been given a permanent suspension on Twitter.
Twitter.
Twitter is known for its toxicity. When you go on Twitter, there is bound to be conflict and arguments about stuff that truly doesn't matter. But why Twitter? Out of all the social media platforms, Twitter seems to be the high school bully of them all. Twitter is just like every social media site, but it isn't. There has always been this level of toxicity that other platforms have, but not to the extent of Twitter. So I decided to look deeper. I want to look deep into why Twitter is so toxic and why people are so addicted to the toxicity. Twitter is toxic, but why are there so many users if Twitter is toxic? Twitter records around 200 million daily active users, and around 500 million tweets are posted every day. You would think that if there was this layer of toxicity on Twitter, people would stop using the platform. But this is where the problem starts. There is no other platform like Twitter. Looking at all forms of social media, Twitter is a staple for news, memes, and trending topics in the world. When people want to discuss a trending topic or situation, Twitter is the place to go. There is no competition. And if you know anything about economics, no competition is bad. When there is no competition, there is no growth, no need for change, because essentially you don't need to, which I think is the start of the problem on Twitter. Twitter has no reason to micromanage its platform and the words and things people say. But then you realize Twitter is uncensored. You can get away with a lot of stuff on Twitter. And Twitter is actually one of the only social media sites that doesn't restrict adult content. And this non-restriction is what really leads to a lot of toxicity on Twitter. So again, why are there so many users if Twitter is toxic? Well, there's this thing called reward-based learning, which Twitter has taken and amplified. Our brains are constantly faced with decisions throughout our life, and we make these decisions based on the reward we gain from these decisions. This is called reward-based learning. This is a process where we require information about stimuli, actions, and context and predict positive outcomes. So how does this apply to Twitter? Well, while doing the research, I realized that in order to understand why Twitter is so toxic, we have to understand why Twitter is so addictive. With reward-based learning, there are 3 steps I will take you through: a trigger, a behavior, and then a reward. A trigger is an event that kicks off an automatic urge to complete a habit. Triggers essentially move you throughout your day-to-day life. An amazing example of a trigger is boredom. Boredom is actually one of the most powerful triggers when it comes to substance abuse relapse. Because when you are bored, you do things to not make you bored. Triggers push us through our everyday life, and the links between preceding triggers and the actions associated with those triggers become stronger. This strengthened connection between habit and trigger can be described as Hebbian learning. This becomes a problem when the neural connection strengthens for a bad habit, because we then perform that bad habit on autopilot. This bad habit that we may perform is the behavior. The behavior is the action we perform because of the trigger. If X, then Y. An example of a behavior might be smoking. A trigger can be something emotional like stress or sadness. Then the behavior that follows the trigger is smoking. These behaviors are ingrained in us due to the triggers that caused them. And the main reason we do these behaviors is because of the reward. The reward is the whole reason for doing the behavior. Let's look at smoking again. So the trigger was stress, the behavior was smoking, and the reward is a relief of that stress. This is why reward-based learning can be detrimental in a way. And this exact reason is why Twitter is so addicting. Let's say you are bored, which can be a trigger. Going on Twitter would be the behavior, and the reward would be you are no longer bored. Even with posting tweets, you have a funny joke, trigger. You post a joke on Twitter, behavior. You then get likes and reposts, the reward. And this, my friends, is the key as to why Twitter is so toxic. Twitter is known for news, and when there's news, there's politics. And if you haven't lived under a rock, you know that politics can get very hectic. When there are strong views from someone, which is going to be the trigger, the behavior might be that they decide to post that very strong opinion. The reward for posting that very strong opinion is that they get likes, retweets, and validation essentially from people who have the same opinion. But one thing people fail to realize is that the behavior for one person can be the trigger for another person. There have been countless beefs online between creators, and for some reason, the drama always rolls over to Twitter. Why? Well, it's the only platform where you can say what you need to say, but also what your audience wants to say. Like the Gideon versus Pokimane beef. Gideon and Pokimane had beef, but it was definitely heightened because of the audience that they both brought. Gideon is known as a menace, so his audience is going to bring the menace mentality. They might say things to Pokimane or fans of Pokimane because of their loyalty to Gideon, and because they know there is no repercussion to their actions. This is where stans come in. Stans, better known as superfans, are fanatics of certain individuals. This passion and love for certain individuals leads to a lot of toxic situations. This created a thing called Stan Twitter, a section of Twitter that is comprised of a cult-like group of fanatics that worship an artist, artist group, or influencer. Stan Twitter is notorious for emotional reactions and being toxic. I do want to say that there is a part of Stan Twitter that is actually pretty chill and usually just posts a bunch of dark humor and funny memes, but we're not talking about that right now. We are talking about the group of individuals with an anime profile picture and will start drama with anyone who doesn't like their favorite anime or anime character. And like I said earlier, this anonymity from Stan Twitter and just Twitter in general is what makes it toxic. From social media to video games, anonymity fuels toxicity. This is called the online disinhibition effect. This effect is the lack of restraint we feel when we communicate online in comparison to communicating in person, which is another reason as to why Twitter is so toxic. People feel safer saying things online that they wouldn't say in real life because they have the ability to remain anonymous, from hostile language to even threats such as doxing. Toxic disinhibition has led to a lot of hate and toxicity online. A great example of Twitter being toxic for no reason was with TommyInnit. TommyInnit is a Minecraft YouTuber and Twitch streamer who bangs in views, and with this massive audience comes a bunch of weirdos, from obsessive cult-like fan pages to literally fan fiction of an underage boy. Minecraft stans on Twitter are goofy human beings who have nothing better to do than to bully a 17-year-old into therapy, all from a little joke. TommyInnit had made a joke about J-Slat and the whole community got baby rage mad and tried to cancel TommyInnit, and even started trending the hashtag TommyNeg. It's situations like this and many others as to why nobody truly likes Twitter and why it has become the bully of social media. But overall, Twitter isn't really that toxic of a space. Ever heard of the loud minority? Yep, that's essentially what Twitter is. There are a lot of communities that aren't toxic, but that's not what you see. It's kind of like the news. The tragic and more serious stories are more interesting and yield a bigger audience. Same as Twitter. The more toxic stories and tweets are pushed to the forefront and are usually the ones that commentary channels do videos on, therefore giving the persona that the majority of Twitter is toxic when it isn't. So even though Twitter is the bully of the social media world, there are some pretty funny and chill communities like my Twitter. To be honest, I don't really care if you follow or not, it just seemed like a good segue into my outro. So thanks for watching, catch you goofies later.